Hello, everybody. This is Jeff at divinecosmos.net, and this is my very first question and answer video. I recently received some questions from a reader via email, and that I thought were pretty interesting, and I'm going to share with you my answers or my perspective to them. So the very first question was, were all the souls created at once at the beginning, or are new souls being created as the God in the universe expands? Well, as is usual with everything in the metaphysics, the complete answer to this question is far more complicated and subtle than you can imagine. But the short answer is souls are being created dynamically in cycles. So they're not all created at once. They are created, they have experiences, and then they reintegrate with Source. And then more are created, and they have experiences, and they reintegrate with Source. So it's cyclical, it's dynamic. So to dive a little bit deeper into the answer to this question, it's important to understand that source consciousness, God, the consciousness system, is engaged in a process of evolving and expanding its consciousness. Source is just consciousness, non-physical, formless. And it's engaged in a process of evolving and expanding its consciousness. And the way it's doing this is that it is creating multitudes of reality constructs and then diving in and experiencing them. Well, how does it do this? It does this by subdividing its consciousness into what I like to call subthreads of its consciousness, each individuated units of its consciousness, so that it can actually be doing more than one thing in parallel. Each one of these individuated units or subthreads of its consciousness has its own focal point of awareness or perception. So it can operate in parallel to all the other threads of source consciousness. And a whole bunch of these threads of source consciousness are engaged in designing, implementing, and maintaining the reality constructs that it's going to experience to learn, grow, and evolve from. And a whole bunch of the other subthreads of source consciousness are actually experiencing those reality constructs. The whole thing is source. Source is playing every role. Source is every thread of consciousness. Just some of them don't realize that because they are immersed in a special type of reality that we designed. So we would forget that we were source. We'd forget that we are the creator of realities, that we are both the creator and experiencer of realities. That's the kind of reality system that we're currently engaged in experiencing here. And this entire process, this is the evolutionary process of source, of the consciousness system. And it's extremely interesting, and it's very dynamic and very cyclical. So normally I use the term soul for a very specific type of thread of consciousness within the consciousness system. When source subdivides itself, it does so in a fractal tree-like subdivision process. So there is a fractal tree structure of consciousness, trillions upon trillions upon trillions upon trillions of threads of consciousness in a multi-level branching fractal tree-like structure. And souls are the threads of consciousness that are at closest to the leaf nodes in the fractal tree structure of consciousness. And their purpose is to incarnate into low frequency reality constructs, duality realities, separation realities, similar to the one that we're currently engaged in experiencing. And these subthreads, these threads of source consciousness that we call the souls, they're created by their parent level of consciousness that I normally call the oversoul level of consciousness. And oversoul dynamically creates subthreads of its consciousness to experience realities and accumulate knowledge and wisdom from those experiences. And the oversoul can run many subthreads of its consciousness, many souls at once, each being in a different reality, having different experiences. But there appears to be a limit to how many in parallel subthreads of its consciousness an oversoul can create and run at the same time. It's said to be 12, but who knows? It doesn't really matter. And each one of these subthreads of an oversoul's consciousness that we call a soul is engaged in a series of experiences in various realities, what we call incarnating into a reality. Typically, each soul will have thousands of incarnations. And the purpose is to grow and evolve and gather a fairly well-rounded body of experience in these types of reality contexts, and then return the knowledge and wisdom and experience to the oversoul. So the souls are a part of an oversoul that's having experiences in certain realities and helping the oversoul expand and evolve its consciousness. So each soul's on a journey of many lives, and eventually that journey of learning, growth, evolution is complete, and a soul will reintegrate with its oversoul. When it does that, it returns all the knowledge and wisdom gleaned from its experiences to the oversoul, and doesn't exist independently any longer. It becomes its oversoul. It reintegrates with its oversoul. And as each soul completes its journey of lives and reintegrates, the oversoul can then create a new soul or a new subthread of its consciousness to experience multiple realities and go through its journey. So an oversoul might actually, over the lifetime of an oversoul, this is the level of consciousness above our soul that we are an aspect of. Over the lifetime of your oversoul, the oversoul might create thousands, hundreds of thousands of souls, and each one of those souls has thousands of lives. So your oversoul accumulates the experience, knowledge, and wisdom from millions of lives or millions of experiences within various reality constructs. So that's the cyclical nature of souls. They're created, they have their journeys of experience in various realities, and when they've evolved and grown, they reintegrate with their oversoul, and the oversoul keeps spawning new souls until its journey of evolution completes. That's millions of lives in total. And then it will reintegrate with the next level of consciousness up in the chain of consciousness to source, because We're all source, but we're multiple branching levels down in the multi-threaded structure of source consciousness. If you want to learn more about that multi-threaded composite structure of source consciousness, of the consciousness system, I check out my article, The Multidimensional Self, Soul, the Oversoul, and Beyond. You might also want to check out the Universal Ascension Process, Our Journey to Oneness, which describes the evolutionary dynamic and cycles within that fractal tree structure of consciousness. So the next question that this reader asked was, do souls have a gender? Or are they genderless until they incarnate? And the short answer is, yeah, they're essentially genderless because your soul is consciousness, non-physical and formless. That's not to say that consciousness can't have the feminine qualities, the qualities that we might describe as feminine-like, or qualities that we might describe as masculine-like. But even at the soul level of consciousness, any bias towards masculine qualities or feminine qualities is very subtle. The clincher here is that each soul incarnates thousands of times, and it plays female roles and it plays male roles tons and tons of time. So the female and the male, as the way we conceive of it, is simply one of the polarities within a duality reality. It's really a fundamental polarity within duality realities because it's associated with our image of self, our body, which are just avatars. They're not really real. You're your soul. You're your soul's consciousness, right? The body, you're not your body. You are your soul, and your soul is simply consciousness. But in a duality reality, in any reality, in physical, any reality construct, your consciousness associates itself with some sort of form, some sort of body. And in duality realities, those bodies can either be on one end of a spectrum or another. They can have one of two polarities, male or female. That makes it interesting. There's a very interesting dynamic that goes on when there are these two genders of self. And it creates an interesting dynamic that is formative. So gender is one of the core dualities that creates this feeling like that of self-identity in form. But it's just part of the game. That's a part of the illusion. That's a part of the reality construct. It's got nothing to do with what you really are, which is just pure consciousness. But like I said, that's not to say that a soul's conscious doesn't have a slight bias towards something that we would refer to as feminine qualities of consciousness or masculine qualities of consciousness. It's just very subtle. And again, the clincher is each soul incarnates thousands of times and plays both male and female roles. So you can kind of see how the soul itself is mostly independent of gender. And if you go up a level in your consciousness, if you go up into your higher self, your oversoul, the oversoul is the sum of millions of incarnations, millions of life experiences. Any idiosyncrasies, including divine masculine, female, masculine or female qualities of consciousness, are going to be averaged out because it's the sum of such a broad set of experiences. And it knows itself to be source, which has been everything. And as you go up the chain of consciousness above the oversoul, all the way up to source, of course, source has played every role in every reality. We are source, playing this part in this reality construct. We designed it so we wouldn't remember that we were source, and that we wouldn't remember that we're creators, which creates an interesting experience and a very formative one. But we are source, expressing here in this reality. So if you go up from your oversoul, you can get all the way up to source, and source has been everything, has created everything, and played every role in every reality construct. It's a perfect balance of all qualities of consciousness, period. So I hope that answered that question. That's my perspective on that. So what's the next question this reader had? Well, does God have a gender? And I pretty much answered that with what I just said. No, consciousness does not really have a gender. Gender is just something that is a part of duality reality constructs. And that the God, which is the source consciousness system, which is just consciousness, the realities are basically virtual constructs that we experience. That's it. They're more like an illusion, perceptual illusions that are extremely convincing than anything else. So God is a perfect balance of all qualities of consciousness, basically. No gender whatsoever. That's why I don't typically use the term God. I prefer to say source or source consciousness or the consciousness system. So it's very clear what the nature of this thing is. But I wouldn't say, I don't refer to source as a him or a her. It's an it. It is. It exists. That's it. It is. So we play out the interesting dynamic of male and female within duality realities because it's interesting. It's fun. And it creates an interesting learning dynamic. That's it. It's part of the game. It isn't a part of what we really are. And that's my perspective anyways. And again, if you want to learn more about the multi-threaded composite structure of source consciousness, the consciousness system, it's like a fractal tree structure of consciousness, then check out Multidimensional Self, the Soul, Oversoul, and Beyond, which talks about the structure. And check out the Universal Ascension Process, Our Journey to Oneness, which talks about the evolutionary dynamic going on within that structure. All right, what is her next question? Yeah, it was her. The reader's next question was, when we incarnate in a human form, do we get to choose the body and the life? Or is it our higher souls that choose for us? I'm assuming what you mean by our higher soul is what people typically call higher self, which I normally call the oversoul. I've used that term in the earlier discussion here. So your higher self or your oversoul. So your soul is a subthread of its oversoul. The oversoul created this aspect of itself, this sub-thread of its consciousness, to go have some experiences and return some knowledge and wisdom from it so it can evolve. It's my understanding that the soul is the primary decision maker in everything having to do with each one of its incarnations, its life experiences, its the family, the body, the situation, everything else about the life plan. The soul is the primary decision maker, but the soul is an aspect of its oversoul or its higher self. So obviously, the soul is going to be in close consultation with its higher self on how to achieve the growth, learning, and evolution objectives of what it's doing, of its incarnations. And also, every soul has a team of guides and mentors. So the soul is making its is the primary decision maker, but it's certainly doing this in consultation with its guides and its higher self, oversoul, without a doubt. So what if the oversoul has a strong interest and recommendation as to what kind of experiences that the soul should be incarnating in? There's two ways to look at it. If you look at the oversoul as something separate from yourself, then you could interpret it as being someone else is making your decisions for you, or decisions are being imposed upon you. And the other perspective is to realize that your soul is just a part or aspect of your oversoul. So in a sense, your oversoul is you. So it's just like parts of yourself negotiating what the purpose of all this is. So the way I like to look at it is the soul is the primary decision maker, but is obviously in close consultation with its oversoul and its guides, because they have the bigger perspective. They have longer life cycles. They have a much more wisdom to guide this particular soul in its journey. So that's my perspective on that. Let's see, what was her next question? This one's good. This one's a lot of people are interested in this one. Can our souls choose to incarnate in forms other than humans? Can they incarnate as animals or other creatures? And the answer is yes. Souls can incarnate in non-human form. In fact, they do, because the Earth and humanoid form is not the only planet in the universe or the multiverse, and humanoid forms are not the only life form in existence. There are a huge diversity of forms. There's insectoid, intelligent, upright insectoid forms. There's intelligent, upright, like avian forms. There's almost any form that you can imagine exists. And our souls incarnate all over the universe into all these forms, not just on Earth in human form. But souls rarely incarnate in lower sentient life forms, like what we'd call animals or other creatures. They rarely do that. And the reason is it doesn't fulfill the purpose of what they're trying to do. Bottom line is, incarnating in anything other than a human form is not as interesting and informative as being a human. So that's what we're trying to do. There's one exception to that, though, and that is quite a few souls incarnate as the pets to humans, because it serves a really important role. Pets can teach humans a lot of lessons about unconditional love, compassion, kindness, etc. And the companionship of a pet is really a wonderful thing. So that's the main exception. Souls will incarnate as pets to humans. Other than that, there's really no point, because it wouldn't drive your evolution of your consciousness to be anything else. Now, having said that, there are threads of consciousness that are animating all the animals, all the creatures, but they're of a slightly different type of consciousness, perhaps slightly lower level of sentience, and they have dedicated themselves to providing the environment through which we can have our human experience in. So they are service entities. They're which are creating the context, the environment, the reality construct for us to play in. So that's the big picture on that, as far as I understand. So that's it for today. That's my perspective on those questions. If you guys have any thoughts or comments or other ideas, I'd love to hear about them. Go ahead and share them in the comments below the article or the video, and feel free to email me if you want to discuss something a little more personally.